Domo domo! What is up, everybody? This is official Jujutsu Kaisen translator Steady here, but we are here today for the obvious reason. If you are a fan of the manga, you have no doubt realized that we have hit chapter 100.
Very exciting time.
I am here today, just kind of fun little video to discuss some of my favorite top moments of Jujutsu Kaisen so far in the first 100 chapters. Now, why 7, you ask? Because 7 in Japanese is Nana. Nanami, of course, the character in this house. We represent Nanami. Now, I should mention that these top 7 moments are not in any particular order. Jujutsu Kaisen is a manga that represents funny moments, great battles, kind of sentimental moments, and great characters, all these different aspects. You can't really place one on top of the other because it's just how they work off of each other that make the manga so great. And definitely this video is intended to kind of spark a little bit of a conversation as well. As I mentioned, these top 7 moments are very subjective. They're kind of my top 7 moments of the series so far. So if you agree or disagree, or if you'd like to maybe add on a couple more that you feel definitely needs to kind of make it into the top moments, feel free to comment them, even if it's not your top 7 moments, even if it's just 1 or 2. But since we are going with 7 moments that are the best in Jujutsu Kaisen so far, I would be remiss if I don't start with my boy Nanami. That's right, we're going to be starting off with chapter 100. So what a great place to start with chapter 100. So obviously there's the kind of anticipation whether the 100th chapter of a series is going to live up to the hype or not, and it did not disappoint. When talking about my favorite characters of Jujutsu Kaisen, I always mention Nanami. Of course, in addition to the main trio of Yuji, Fushiguro, and Nobara. So Nanami kind of has this sense of, he's kind of jaded, right? There's the kind of background info on him of what his previous job was and how he was kind of getting tired of that. And he came back into the Jujutsu world. But even in the Jujutsu world, he still questions the way things are run. And he makes that very clear when he first meets Yuji. So we know what Nanami's character is kind of all about in terms of he's very straight-laced, he kind of doesn't really show too much emotion, but that's what makes characters like this so great when they show that sort of emotion. And in chapter 100, we got that. Now, when I say emotion, I'm not saying that like they start screaming or they start laughing all of a sudden. When it comes to Nanami, he doesn't really have to say much to really convey a lot.
That I wish you well in all.
So of course we know how strong Nanami is based on his fight against Mahito, and Mahito is a special grade curse, and even though Nanami is grade 1, he takes on Mahito and wins the fight for all intents and purposes. And what makes characters like this so great is when characters like this, who are usually pretty reserved and pretty docile, kind of get poking the bear, so to speak, right? And when you piss off a character like this, it's just so cool to see them go ham. So in chapter 99, it finishes off with his kind of Undertaker entrance. And then there is this kind of moment at the point of chapter 99 when it ends where we think, well, maybe it's going to be a Nanami and Nobara versus this side ponytail guy. And it's going to be kind of a struggle, maybe a little bit. Yeah, Nanami's pissed, but maybe there's going to be a little bit of a fight. But for anyone who was thinking that, boy, were we wrong. Nanami means business, and he took care of business. So this is a classic kind of hype moment, I would categorize it, in the Jujutsu Kaisen series so far. So chapter 100 definitely has to be in my top 7 just because of the pure kind of hype factor, the fact that it didn't disappoint, knowing that it is this kind of momentous occasion of chapter 100, but kind of brought enough hype that we felt very satisfied and we kind of want to know what's next. going into the next set of 100 chapters. So for my next entry, I want to go from the most recent chapter to one of the more earlier chapters. Kind of the earliest chapter that I would say tipped the series in a way where you start to become very invested in and had a very kind of significant content in the chapter. And of course, Volume 1 definitely introduced us to the characters, kind of told us a little bit about the world, what the world is about. But I would say the first tipping point has to be in Chapter 11. Chapter 11 titled A Dream. So a dream, kind of referring to what Gojo's dream and what he wants from the next generation of Jujutsu sorcerers. Now, if Chapter 100 brought us the hype, Chapter 11 kind of brought us a little bit more of a story depth and kind of these sentimental moments, especially when it comes to Gojo, because what we've seen of Gojo so far, his little kind of tussle with Sukuna, it was just kind of really based on what his abilities are and just kind of how strong he is, the self-proclaimed strongest. But when it comes to this, Chapter 11, the first page kind of, although it kind of brings us into a humorous way, he says, Ijichi, you're in for a serious face slap later, which is really, really kind of funny. Gives us that moment of kind of comic relief as well. But then immediately after that, this kind of moment of kind of comic relief, he says, I have a dream. And I love this really kind of this chapter cover page right here with Gojo with kind of his face covered. He has that smile. So, and it's kind of this refreshing moment where we see Gojo kind of from a different angle. But of course, this leads into the main conflict of the story, I would say, overall. So at this point, Itadori is killed. Of course, kind of a WTF moment in the series. So we have this little tussle between Sukuna and Itadori, but of course one of the most important pages comes in pages 10 and 11. So Sukuna brings up two terms. He says term number 1, in the condition number 1 in this binding vow, he says, you agree to let me take over your body for 1 full minute when I chant in chain. And number 2, you'll forget about this agreement. So at this point in the story, Itadori is not very familiar with the Jujutsu world or what binding vows are all about. So obviously Sukuna, he's a curse. He's a very cool, very charming character, but in the end he is a curse. So this kind of brings up this moment that we need to always keep in the back of our head whenever there's conflict in the more recent chapters, especially in the Shibuya arc. He might run into Mahito, he might run into Geto or fake Geto. We always have to kind of be reminded, keep this thing kind of pestering us in the back of our head. When is Sukuna going to call out Itadori on this binding vow? Because the way that the chapter kind of progresses is that on page 13, although it is kind of, it's almost comical the way that Itadori's face is just kind of chopped off, he does say okay. So he agrees to this binding vow, and we always need to remember that. So definitely I'd say chapter 11 on a whole, chapter A Dream, has a lot of substance packed into it, and maybe when you're kind of starting the series, you're kind of flipping through it, you don't really realize how significant this chapter is. But I thought definitely if you're talking about top moments of the first 100 chapters, you have to bring this up, I would say, because it kind of really pinpoints where the series really kind of fleshes out what it's all about and kind of foreshadows what might potentially happen in the future. So we had Nanami as kind of a hype moment, and then we have this moment to kind of give the world a little bit more depth, give the characters a little bit more depth. Alright, so for my third favorite moment of Jujutsu Kaisen so far, I have to kind of dial it back a little bit. We're going to find one of the middle chapters, and we're going to go with a little bit of a lighter tone on this one. Although inside this lighter tone, there is a huge message that got me to love Itadori. This is the moment that I truly fell in love with Itadori Yuji. And of course, up until now, he's been a very appealing character and someone that you really kind of care for. But this is the moment that you really said, man, he is cool, he is down to earth, and he is truly worthy of a Shonen Jump protagonist. So we're going to be taking it to chapter 64. It's like that. So chapter 64 comes after the Yasuhachi bridge arc, which in and of itself was a very significant arc. The way that Itadori and Nobara kind of interacted after they fought these special grade curses, the Kechizu and Isso. And kind of their conversation and the way that it was paneled was done very, very beautifully. And it kind of really gave a depth to Yuji. He realizes that not all curses are the same, and the way that he felt apologetic almost when he finished off Eso, when he saw the face that Eso gave. So It's Like That is the chapter that everyone meets at the diner, and Ozawa, one of Itadori's old classmates, comes back and looks completely different. It's a very humorous chapter, right? It even starts out with Todo and Mei playing ping pong, which, as a fan of ping pong, the manga and the anime and the movie, I gotta say that this really, I was like, man, Akutami Sensei knows what's up. And I know there's a bunch of Matsumoto Taiyo fans out there as well. So if you're a fan of like Tekkon Kincrete or ping pong and stuff, that this was really kind of hit a home run for us, right? But of course, even after this this little humorous moment with Todo and Mei, we're thrown into this little situation where we see Nobara kind of shopping around, and then she's approached by this girl called Ozawa. And Ozawa Yuko is actually a former classmate of Yuji, and it's revealed that she used to like Yuji. And just kind of, it's even funny just the fact that she looks so different too, right? Nobara even kind of makes the comment that she's like Kuroko Sato from Yu Yu Hakusho. And if you're a Yu Yu Hakusho fan, you kind of know what that's referring to as well, the different appearance of Kuroko Sato. But then we see this nice little moment with this photograph with Yuji and Ozawa, and Ozawa's kind of blushing a little bit. And then the fact that the chapter is called It's Like That is referring to this funny little moment where Nobara realizes, oh my gosh, she likes Yuji. He's like, is it like that? And she's like, yeah, it's like that. But also kind of it's a little bit significant here too, because there's been talks about kind of whether Nobara and Yuji are going to have a ship and things like that too. But this chapter, whether you care to admit it or not, I'm pretty sure Akutami Sensei here was, and not to say that this can't change down the road, but Akutami Sensei is here kind of establishing the fact that Nobara and Yuji are not an item. Then Fushiguro shows up, and even Fushiguro is like, you know, he's a brooding character, but he's actually very witty, and he's very kind of in tune with what's going on as well, right? So he realizes, like, it's like that, as opposed to kind of your classic brooding character that might not really pick up on those kind of things. But he's all about it too, and the three of them are kind of talking about this, and Fushiguro mentions, oh right, he said something about liking tall girls, and Ozawa is, by Japanese standards, a taller girl. So they're like, man, let's get him in here, we gotta call Yuji right now. And she's like, and Nobara's like, you're okay with that, right, Yuko? And it's like, yeah, get him over here. And then of course we have this little message between Yuji and Nobara saying like, hey, diner, come. Why? Come. Okay. It kind of shows you their relationship too, right? But then Nobara kind of realizes her mistake, so to speak, in calling Yuji over here, knowing kind of the sensitive nature of the situation with Yuko and how she likes Itadori, and the fact that she looks so different. Yuji will most likely not recognize her. I mean, who would? But this is where Yuji just hits full marks, obviously represented here by Nobara and Fushiguro with their little 10s, 10 out of 10 kind of remark here. Yuji with his "Hey Ozawa, what's up?" Just really down to earth, really cool, casual. He recognizes that it's Ozawa, doesn't make a big deal out of it, but is friendly and kind of, like I said, down to earth. And man, even I was like, damn, he's a smooth criminal right here, Yuji. And it's so kind of really heartwarming here, right? He sees people in a way that beyond just the appearance, which is a really beautiful quality, I would say. And he mentions kind of comments that she's really elegant, and she sees those kind of great qualities that other people might not be able to see. The little interaction between these, between Yuji and Ozawa finishes back in present day at the diner. He says, "We'll see you again, mata ne." He's saying, it's not like, "All right, bye." He says, "We'll see you again," implying that, hey, it was good seeing you. Hopefully we'll see each other again soon. That's very much the intention of this "see you again." And of course, we finish off the chapter by Nobara with her little remark saying, "Hey, I can't believe he might get a girlfriend before I get a boyfriend. That's not how it's supposed to happen." So for entry number 4, let's bring back the hype a little bit. And we can't talk about hype in Jujutsu Kaisen without talking about the one and only, the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer alive, self-proclaimed but also proven, Gojo Sensei. And obviously throughout the 100 chapters of Jujutsu Kaisen, we've seen many moments where Gojo Sensei proves himself to be the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer alive, whether it was in the flashback arc or in the recent Shibuya arc versus the likes of Hanami and Jogo. But really, I would say the first taste that we got, where we got to see it in full action, and even though we saw a little bit in chapter 2 of Gojo Sensei versus Sukuna, you can't talk about hype moments in Jujutsu Kaisen with Gojo Sensei without talking about chapter 15, which is Domain. Now, this was a moment in Jujutsu Kaisen which really kind of elevated the action and really showed what the Jujutsu techniques are all about, and specifically domain expansions. Now, once Jujutsu Kaisen becomes more and more popular, I have no doubt that this specific moment is going to be one of those kind of moments where you see it on everywhere on Twitter. Once the anime comes out and it's animated, you're gonna see kind of people talking about it and the buzz, and what's really gonna bring Gojo Sensei to the forefront and, you know, say, oh my god, he's the new coolest character in Shonen Jump, even though us manga readers have always known that from the start. So Gojo Sensei and Ijichi are in a car on the little highway when they're met with Jogo, and he's categorized as a special grade curse, and obviously we know what special grade can mean, but up against Gojo Sensei it doesn't mean anything. Now, this is right in the middle of the time where Yuji is kind of still assumed to be dead, but Gojo Sensei is secretly training him, and Yuji kind of does his little film training, watching movies and all that, and then Gojo brings him to the forefront of battle to show him what it means to be a Jujutsu sorcerer, and not only a Jujutsu sorcerer but a top level Jujutsu sorcerer, and being able to use domain expansion. So in response to Jogo's coffin of the Iron Mountain, we see Gojo Sensei now with Yuji in tow. Yuji's all scared, wondering, man, this is completely different from the curses that I've met before. And then comes Gojo Sensei with his domain expansion. Of course, the classic scene now where he takes off his blindfold, the mysterious blindfold, and then he utters the words domain expansion, unlimited void. Boom! Then just this double spread right here, just kind of going into this weird space-time, like void continuum kind of deal. So many, all those words, all those space and times, and But obviously for those of us who've been reading it from the start, finally kind of seeing Gojo just doing his thing and showing off, this was a moment of pure hype. And surely for anyone who's read the series and kind of talking about their favorite moments or top moments of the series, this has to be one if you're going to place it in the kind of hype category. This was the moment where we were shown what it means to be the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer alive, and Yuji saw it front and center. Alright, so for entry number 5, I'm going to have to refer to chapter 27 with What If. Now, this is very much kind of one of those pull at your heartstring kind of moments, really plays with your emotions, but really was a masterclass in Akutami Sensei's storytelling. It was a moment filled with emotions, both anger, sadness, guilt. And let me just start off with the kind of the cover page right here. Chapter 27, What If? We see the main trio along with Junpei now wearing the Jujutsu High uniform. And a really kind of beautiful drawing here showing kind of a glimmer of hope. But then you're quickly reminded with the title that says, What If? In Japanese, Moshimo, and we translate it into what if, kind of saying, wait a second, is this kind of a dream scenario here? And it kind of, before you even get into the chapter, you start to feel a little bit nervous, especially knowing with what the situation is going on right now, where Yuji has kind of infiltrated the school that he knows Junpei should be at, and then he confronts Mahito. Now, of course, this is the first time that Yuji actually runs into Mahito, and he's in for a rude awakening. Not moments after he meets him, the moment happens when Junpei is killed. And this obviously fleshes out what's so great about Yuji as a character as well. He's obviously very down to earth, he's kind of aloof at times, but kind of what makes Shonen Jump protagonists, there's a common thread that I would say is that they don't typically get angry, but when they do, it's on behalf of someone else. They don't get really angry with kind of silly things, but they get angry when it counts and for someone else. Yuji thrusted into this situation. He's still very new to the Jujutsu world, and he sees Junpei transfigured now, and so many things going through his head. He looks to the only thing that he knows that might be able to help him, which is Sukuna. And kind of given the relationship that you've seen between them in the past, you know, Sukuna kind of fixing Yuji's arm or the heart and things like that, you're given a moment to think, hey, maybe Sukuna actually will help him. But again, we're in for a rude awakening. And this double spread right here. We see Sukuna and Mahito just laughing in Yuji's face. And we're reminded, just as Yuji mentions, I almost forgot. These guys are and always will be curses. And especially with Yuji's character at the time, we've seen him grow a lot. He's kind of been able to kind of suppress his emotions a little bit more, think things a little bit more logically, especially spending time with Nanami. But this, we see him just with pure rage. From the constructs of the soul, he says, I'm gonna kill you. Now, as I mentioned, this moment I would say is very, very significant in the story, because even as the reader, we're kind of starting to appreciate the curses in kind of they're kind of charming almost, and it's like, oh, maybe there's some qualities to like about them as well. But Akutami Sensei in a very opportune moment, reminds us in the end they are always curses. Because of course, especially throughout the Yasuhachi Bridge arc, like I mentioned before, with the relationship between Yuji and Eso, for example, how he felt sorry about finishing off Eso, there is this kind of theme in Jujutsu Kaisen about not all curses are bad perhaps, and there's this kind of struggle of the understanding of what a curse's identity is, what a human being's identity is. And in my opinion, I think that this is going to be a huge conflict down the road in the hundreds of chapters to come, especially now that we know that there are kind of curse human hybrids and things like that. Now for my next entry number 6, I'm going to have to kind of go with a personal favorite of mine, a little bit from left field, and perhaps not really at first glance really important in terms of the significance to the story, but it still does pack a lot of important content, and for me it was just such a beautifully done chapter that I have to put in one of my favorite moments of Jujutsu Kaisen so far. And it is none other than the fight between Maki and Mai during the team battle of the Goodwill event. Chapter 42 specifically. Now in the Jujutsu world, we're obviously introduced to a lot of sorcerers such as Gojo or Fushiguro, who seem to be kind of born into the world. They just have this knack, they have the techniques for it. And of course, when it comes to that notion, we have to talk about heavenly restriction. And obviously I could have chose Toji as well, and how he exploited the fact that he doesn't actually have cursed energy. But in terms of just kind of the beauty of the chapter and how it's done, I have to go with Maki. Best girl, up there with Nobara, and maybe even maybe Kasumi Miwa, but this chapter was so beautifully done in terms of kind of its pacing. So we know that Mai and Maki are twin sisters. They kind of have obviously a history, but we see that Mai is at Kyoto school and Maki is at Tokyo school, and we're not really too sure why. Mai, who was born with a curse technique, and Maki, who was born without one. She can't even see curses. And I of course I love this kind of moment where we see Maki and Mai as little girls, and we see kid Maki, which is just too cute. But it's kind of a very heartwarming scene here where we see Maki just pulling Mai along, her sister, and we see them as sisters, not as rivals at that moment. And this chapter is beautifully done with this kind of flash forward, flashback, flash forward, flashback, but it doesn't really seem like confusing or anything. It's just done in a way that is just really gives the scene full effect and gives this conflict between Maki and Mai kind of this significance. Like I can almost imagine once the anime comes out, just the kind of the music that's going to kind of go along with this, and the sound of kind of fast-paced music versus kind of this slow-paced music when they go into the flashbacks. And of course, in terms of just sheer hype, we see Maki coming in, cutting a bullet in half. I mean, that's pretty badass. And not only does she cut a bullet in half, she actually catches one too. I mean, who catches a bullet?
My daddy saved 5 crackheads from a burning building by himself.
My daddy once caught a bullet with his bare hands.
My daddy kick your daddy all the way from here to China or Japan, wherever the hell you from, and all up that Great Wall too.
Don't talk about my father.
Don't talk about my daddy.
So obviously, as a Maki fan, this kind of really elevated her character in my book. But this is what I mean with how the chapter was just so beautifully done. It kind of brought those moments of hype, brought those moments of kind of adorableness. But in the end, once the chapter is done, I found myself being very melancholy. And that's when you know a chapter is done very, very well. You're kind of shown Maki up until now as this kind of just very dry, kind of just like get things done kind of attitude. We see Mai up until now as just she's very mean-spirited. But by the end of this chapter, we kind of see them, both Maki and Mai, beyond just those one dimensions. We see the relationship that they have with each other, and we see Maki for who she is inside as well. That for her, it wasn't just an easy decision to just kind of leave the house of Zenin. And for Mai, she's kind of a girl, just wants to be with her sister. She doesn't really want to be in this situation, and she's kind of crying out for help a little bit. So it did kind of make me feel very melancholy at the end of the chapter, but it was beautifully done nonetheless. And hopefully this was kind of a, maybe not at this moment, but a kind of a turning point for these two sisters. Maybe we'll see them in the future fighting together alongside each other, hopefully. Alright, so for my final favorite moment of Jujutsu Kaisen so far, and believe me, I really had to I could have gone with 10, 15 entries if I'm honest. There's just so many great moments, but I want to kind of keep it a little bit more concise. Otherwise, I'd be here for hours talking about this. I know there are really hype moments, like in the flashback arcs with Toji and Gojo, like I mentioned before, or whether it be Megumi, the first time he kind of uses his partial domain expansion. But of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one of the more recent chapters, chapter 90, the Shibuya Incident Part 8, Geto and his character revelation. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you can't have a great manga without great characters. And I would say not only just great characters, when you're talking about characters, not just the, quote unquote good guys, but you also have to have great antagonists as well. Kind of the struggle where you can almost relate to the antagonist, where you can almost be like convinced by them saying, yeah, I can kind of see how they are acting this way. Like if you're talking about Western comics, for example, like Magneto. Although he's very radical, you kind of do have moments where you're like, yeah, I kind of see what he's saying. So with Geto, it definitely has that kind of aspect about him. So I'm going to cheat a little bit here with Geto and talk about kind of a series of moments that led up to the one big reveal. So in the flashback arc, or the hidden inventory arc, we're given a lot of time to kind of flesh out Geto as a character, his relationship to Gojo, and we kind of see him for beyond just the antagonist that we know him as today. We see that Geto, kind of contrary to what we might have believed, is actually just a very gentle, very kind-hearted person. Of course, he likes to have that kind of camaraderie with Gojo a little bit. Although he wants to kind of do what's right for the world through his Jujutsu sorcery, he starts to become very much jaded with the world. And of course, the moment where it kind of turns in the flashback arc, they go and save the star plasma vessel Riko, but she's obviously shot, right? Now, I could have selected this moment as well, specifically, but it's very much just a turning point for the bigger events later on. He kind of goes back to Jutsu High, becomes very jaded. We kind of flash forward a little bit and we see Geto just day in, day out, the grind. We see these beautiful panels where we have just Geto just kind of consuming these curses, and just the wordplay that's used here where it says curses taste like a rag that's wiped up vomit. It's just so graphic, but really kind of gives you an idea of what Geto has to go through. But then one day, Geto actually runs into Tsukumo, who is the 4th special grade Jujutsu sorcerer, obviously along with Gojo, Geto, Yuta, and Tsukumo, kind of the mysterious one still of the bunch, right? And this kind of conversation that they have really is a big turning point for Geto's character. And obviously this leads to the village massacre. And again, like I mentioned with the Riko moment, this village massacre moment is of course very, very significant. But again, this is just kind of a stepping stone to what happens later on. So now we kind of understand that Geto, what he's all about, and why he's so jaded with the world, and why he kind of leaves Jutsu High behind him. But in chapter 90, that's where it all changes. Everything that we thought we knew goes out the window. It's a very kind of, obviously if you're familiar with Bleach, you know, kind of the Aizen reveal moment. For me, it had that kind of significance. We're led to believe, we kind of have this suspicion that almost Geto's kind of, there's something kind of very different about him. Obviously we see the stitches along his head, but they never really address it. But in this chapter, they address it. So not only was this moment where Geto reveals himself as no longer Geto, it's also very significant in the fact that Prison Realm is actually used, and it worked. All of a sudden, this safety net that is Gojo Satoru is removed from the equation, and this threat of Prison Realm that we've been promised since almost the beginning of the series actually works. So not only for me was this moment significant in the fact of the Geto reveal, I think it was also very important in terms of the kind of the balance of power and the shift of the balance of power. And of course, as we read Shibuya Incident right now, it's not like it's all done. We're not too sure what's going to happen with Gojo in Prison Realm. He is still alive. But I have a feeling that Akutami Sensei will probably kind of follow through in the sense that it's not going to be as easy as just saying open Prison Realm and he's out of there, right? I hope not anyways. So there you go, my top 7 moments of Jujutsu Kaisen so far. I know that there are a lot of things that I might have left out. Believe me, I get it. Things with like Sukuna, for example, or with Toji or Todo. All these kind of great moments. But that's where the comments come in. Let me know what your favorite moments of the series were so far. And believe me, I couldn't fit all of them into just 7 specific moments. But for me, kind of as a fan and as a translator, these are the moments that really made me fall in love with the series over and over again. But of course, 100 chapters in, we've got the anime on the horizon. It's a very exciting time to be a Jujutsu Kaisen fan. If you are a Jujutsu Kaisen fan, read the manga every week. Please definitely consider subscribing because I go through weekly chapter kind of discussions, point of view that maybe you didn't really see, or just kind of a little fun place to kind of talk about the most recent occurrences in the chapter. And I'll definitely have a lot more Jujutsu Kaisen on the horizon as well. Once the anime comes out, I definitely want to cover that as well. So feel free to subscribe if you want. If you don't want to, that's fine as well. But I also have Instagram and Twitter linked in this description. I have a lot of trivia. But there we go. That's it. Thanks very much for sticking around. I want to say thank you for those that do kind of join me each week for my manga lounge sessions. And for those of you that are new and are still watching the video till this moment, thanks very much for sticking around. And hopefully we'll be seeing you around more. But yeah, with that, I want to say, as I always do in my weekly videos, you know how we do. Mata yoroshiku!